In a society that boasts equality and fairness, how can we stand by while a young person is condemned by nothing more than the color of his skin? This isn't just a story. It's a scathing indictment of a system that thrives on prejudice and injustice. Let your outrage rise as we peel back the layers of bias that poison our communities, exposing the bitter truth that equality remains a distant dream for too many. The late afternoon light was beginning its slow descent over the expansive parking lot of the Riverbend Municipal Center, casting long, dappled shadows across smooth concrete and glistening vehicles. The air carried a hint of coolness as a gentle breeze whispered through the towering oaks that lined the lot's perimeter. It was a scene that, on an ordinary day, might have evoked only a sense of calm routine. A place where city employees ended their day and hurried home, where memories of laughter and mundane conversations intertwined with the hum of everyday life. On this particular day, however, the serenity was about to be shattered by an incident that would leave a deep imprint on the hearts of those who witnessed it. As Gloria Mitchell, a middle-aged woman with an air of self-assuredness, stepped into the lot, her eyes darted around with a suspicious glint. Dressed in a sharply tailored navy blazer paired with khaki trousers, her posture and expression exuded an unyielding vigilance. Gloria's every step was purposeful, her gaze scanning the rows of parked cars and the scattered groups of employees until it finally landed on a young man sitting quietly on a weathered bench near the far end of the lot. The young man, Marcus Jordan, appeared almost lost in thought. His posture was relaxed, his eyes fixed on a worn paperback clutched in his hands, a book that seemed to be his only companion amidst the busy silence of the lot. His skin glowed with a rich hue that, to Gloria's eyes, painted an unfamiliar picture against the backdrop of the monochrome parking area. To her, his solitary presence, paired with the quiet intensity of his concentration, was enough to ignite a flame of suspicion. Without a moment's hesitation, Gloria reached for her phone. Her fingers trembled slightly, though whether from adrenaline or a hidden anxiety, she couldn't be sure. In a clear, decisive tone that brooked no argument, she dialed 911. In the background, the fading sunlight seemed to pause as if it, too, was watching the unfolding drama. The contrast between the natural warmth of the setting and the cold determination in Gloria's eyes was stark. The phone call was brief, just enough to relay a message of unease. A lone young man, whose presence did not conform to her expectations, was loitering near a staff entrance of the municipal building. Her voice, steady yet edged with a firm conviction, carried the weight of someone who believed she was acting in the name of public safety. Marcus, unaware of the immediate implications of her actions, continued reading. It was only when he noticed a subtle shift in the atmosphere, a distant murmur of approaching sirens, the murmur of engines, did his heart begin to race. The bench that had been his safe haven now felt like a stage set for a scene he never wished to be part of. His eyes, wide with a mix of confusion and dawning fear, darted around as if searching for an escape that might dissolve the growing tension. For Marcus, those first moments were surreal. 1 minute he was immersed in the narrative of his book. The next, he found himself thrust into an unfolding drama. The world around him seemed to blur, the bright colors of the setting sun now replaced by the flashing blues and reds of police vehicles. His pulse quickened, and a cold shiver ran down his spine. The sound of footsteps grew louder, and soon 2 uniformed officers emerged from one of the arriving patrol cars. Their presence was both commanding and clinical, their faces set in expressions that left little room for explanation. Gloria's eyes narrowed further as she observed Marcus being approached by the officers. To her, every move he made was steeped in the aura of guilt, every gesture a confirmation of her preconceived fears. She hovered near the bench, her phone still clutched tightly, as if ready to provide a running commentary on the scene. Her voice, when she spoke into the phone again, was laced with an urgency that bordered on alarm. A report of a suspicious individual whose mere existence was now enough to disrupt the calm of the entire parking lot. In those fraught minutes, as the officers began questioning Marcus, time itself seemed to stretch and warp. Every second was laden with the heavy burden of misinterpretation. Marcus tried to explain in a soft, almost timid voice that he was merely waiting for his mother, that nothing more sinister was at play. Yet, his words appeared to vanish in the vast expanse of preconceived narratives. The officer's questions, probing and unyielding, added layers to the mounting tension, transforming a simple moment of waiting into a tableau of doubt and fear. The once peaceful parking lot was now a theater of conflicting emotions. Marcus, whose only desire was to enjoy a quiet moment before his day's obligations, felt as if he were the center of an unwanted spotlight. His face, usually expressive with youthful hope and quiet determination, now betrayed flashes of anxiety and hurt. Every glance, every subtle shift in posture, was a testament to the weight of the moment. The bench that had served as his refuge suddenly became a symbol of an intrusion, an unwanted spotlight forcing him into a narrative he did not choose. Gloria, standing off to the side, seemed oblivious to the inner turmoil that now gripped the young man. In her mind, she was the vigilant guardian, the unyielding sentinel ensuring that safety prevailed, that nothing out of the ordinary could go unnoticed. The dichotomy of perspectives was striking. What was for her a justified act of caution was, for Marcus, an act that stripped away his dignity and left him exposed to the harsh scrutiny of a world quick to judge. The cacophony of the approaching sirens merged with the soft rustling of leaves overhead, creating an almost surreal soundscape. It was as if nature itself was bearing silent witness to the unfolding injustice, a quiet protest against the breach of innocence that was being perpetrated in broad daylight. The air, heavy with tension, carried the silent cries of countless others who had faced similar misinterpretations, their stories echoing in the spaces between the arriving officers and the panicked heartbeat of a young man caught in a moment of crisis. As the officers began to move in, their authoritative voices cutting through the murmur of onlookers, the parking lot transformed into a stage for a drama far greater than a simple misunderstanding. Each moment was charged with an intensity that belied the mundane setting. The siren's wail was no longer a mere sound. It was a clarion call, a signal that the ordinary had been irrevocably altered by the collision of bias and fear. In that poignant moment, Marcus felt his world tilt on its axis. The familiar safety of waiting for his mother had been violently upended by forces he could neither control nor comprehend. The innocent act of sitting and reading had suddenly become a catalyst for a chain of events that would mark him in ways he was only beginning to understand. His heart pounded in his chest like a desperate drum, each beat echoing the myriad of emotions swirling within him: confusion, fear, indignation, and a profound sense of isolation. Gloria, meanwhile, stood by with an unwavering belief that she was upholding a necessary standard. In her mind, the call she had made was an act of civic duty, a way to protect the community from perceived threats. Yet, the simplicity of her conviction was marred by the stark reality that her actions had inadvertently cast a young man into a spiral of mistrust and sorrow. Her role in the unfolding scene was that of both an instigator and an unwitting catalyst for a deeper conversation about the nature of safety, identity, and the enduring power of preconceptions. In the charged silence that followed the arrival of the officers, the parking lot bore the weight of a question that hung in the air like a tangible mist. How had an ordinary day transformed into an encounter with prejudice, a moment that would forever alter the course of one young man's life? The answer was not contained in the crisp uniform of the arriving officers or in the stern lines of Gloria's face. It lay hidden in the quiet despair of a boy who had been judged not by his actions, but by the color of his skin. A stark reminder that in a society still grappling with the shadows of bias, innocence could be overshadowed in an instant. As the officers continued their line of questioning and the murmur of onlookers grew into a subdued chorus of whispers and uncertain glances, the scene at the Riverbend Municipal Center parking lot crystallized into a defining moment of modern urban life. It was a moment that exposed the raw nerves of a community, a moment that demanded reflection and action. For Marcus, it was the beginning of a personal journey, a journey marked by the struggle to reclaim his identity and assert his dignity against forces that sought to confine him within narrow and unjust boundaries. The sun, now dipping low on the horizon, cast one final cascade of golden light over the scene, a fleeting reminder that even in the darkest of moments, there was still beauty to be found, still hope to be kindled. In that bittersweet glow, The incident etched itself into the fabric of the day, a silent testament to the power of a single moment to reshape destinies and challenge the status quo. How do you think a simple act of judgment can impact someone's life, and what would you have done in that situation? In the aftermath of the initial commotion, as the blue and red flashes of the police vehicles still danced across the pavement, the parking lot of the Riverbend Municipal Center fell into a tense, uneasy lull. The cacophony of sirens and hurried footsteps gradually softened into a low murmur. Amid this unsettled quiet, Marcus Jordan sat on the same weathered bench, his eyes fixed on a distant point beyond the immediate chaos. Now, stripped of the intrusive glare of suspicion, he was left alone with the echo of his own racing heartbeat and the soft, bittersweet hum of a moment suspended in time. Marcus's mind swirled with a mix of disbelief, sorrow, and quiet resolve. The bench, once a place of innocent solace where he would lose himself in the words of his favorite novels, had become a stark reminder of how quickly his world could be upended. Each echo of footsteps and every distant murmur stirred memories of previous days when life was simpler, a time when he was merely a teenager looking forward to the future, unaware that prejudice lurked in the shadows of everyday encounters. As he sat there, Marcus's thoughts drifted to the subtle details of his daily life. He recalled the comforting routine of his mornings, waking up to the gentle light filtering through his curtains and the soft hum of his mother's voice as she prepared breakfast. Those early hours, filled with tender moments of reassurance and quiet laughter, now contrasted sharply with the harsh reality of this afternoon. It was as if the tranquility of his youth had been momentarily interrupted by a storm he had neither seen nor expected. Around him, the Riverbend Municipal Center was slowly coming back to a semblance of normalcy. City employees, who had paused in their tracks to watch the unfolding drama, began to disperse, their conversations subdued and tinged with unspoken concern. The few remaining vehicles, now parked in a neat yet silent array, seemed to murmur among themselves as if sharing the weight of what had just transpired. Yet, amid all this, the atmosphere remained heavy, a palpable tension that refused to dissipate entirely. Marcus's eyes, damp with unshed tears, wandered over to the entrance of the municipal building. Through the glass doors, he could faintly see a flicker of movement, a subtle reminder of the world continuing on despite the brief disturbance. He wondered what his life would be like if every quiet moment was forever marred by the threat of judgment. Each flash of the police lights, every curt command from an officer, left a deep imprint on his young soul, a reminder that his identity was too often reduced to a stereotype, a single story dictated by the biases of others. He recalled how, just minutes earlier, his simple statement of, "I'm waiting for my mother," had been twisted into a narrative of suspicion. The questioning, laced with an air of condescension, made him feel like an actor forced into a role he never auditioned for, a role defined by mistrust and unfounded assumptions. The questions, their tone both clinical and detached, stripped him of the comfort he usually found in the routine of his day. Now, his inner world was a tapestry of fragmented emotions. Anger simmering beneath the surface, a profound sadness that crept in with every heartbeat, and a cautious hope that, perhaps someday, he might be seen for who he truly was. In this reflective state, the world around Marcus seemed to both slow down and blur together. The rustling of leaves in the gentle breeze became the only sound that reached his ears, punctuating the silence that followed the chaos. He closed his eyes for a moment, trying to conjure the warmth of a memory of laughter shared with friends at a local cafe, of quiet evenings spent reading under the soft glow of a desk lamp, of a time when he believed that the world was fundamentally fair and kind. But the weight of recent events pulled him back to the present. The sense of isolation was overwhelming. The silence around him was not just the absence of noise. It was the echo of every unspoken judgment, every unfair glance that had accompanied the earlier confrontation. In that silence, Marcus felt both invisible and exposed, a paradox that gnawed at him. How could one moment be so full of life and hope, and the next so utterly defined by fear and misunderstanding? It was in this introspective solitude that Marcus began to piece together a resolve, a quiet determination to not let this moment define him. He realized that while the incident had shaken him deeply, it could also serve as a catalyst for change. If nothing else, it had awakened within him a yearning for justice and a longing to reclaim the dignity that had been so callously stripped away. The injustice of being judged solely on his appearance was a bitter pill to swallow, but it also lit a spark of resilience within him. With each beat of his heart, he vowed silently that he would not allow this day to diminish the light within him. As he mulled over these thoughts, the distant hum of conversation began to filter back into his consciousness. A small group of bystanders, who had gathered in the immediate aftermath of the commotion, started to discuss the incident in hushed, tentative tones. Their words were a mix of concern, bewilderment, and, in some cases, regret, a realization that perhaps they had been complicit, even if inadvertently, in perpetuating a system that valued appearances over humanity. Among them was a middle-aged man with kind eyes who softly remarked to a neighbor, "It shouldn't have happened this way," his voice tinged with remorse. These murmurs, though faint, resonated deeply with Marcus, reinforcing the notion that the issue was not isolated to him alone, but rather was a mirror reflecting a broader societal failing. In the midst of this communal reflection, Marcus's thoughts turned to his mother, Elena Jordan, a woman of quiet strength and unwavering resolve. Though he had not seen her since the incident began, her presence loomed large in his memory. Elena had always been a pillar of support, someone who gently guided him through life's uncertainties with wisdom and compassion. He remembered her soft smile and the reassuring warmth of her embrace, qualities that had given him the strength to face the world's challenges. Now, in this moment of profound vulnerability, the anticipation of her arrival was both a beacon of hope and a promise of solace. He clung to the thought that her love would help him navigate through the aftermath of this painful experience. The passage of time, measured in slow, deliberate beats, seemed to bring with it both introspection and a gradual return to a semblance of normality. The officers, having completed their initial questioning, began to retreat, their expressions softening ever so slightly as they moved on to other pressing duties. Yet, the impression of their presence lingered, a stark reminder of how quickly a single misinterpretation could escalate into a life-altering ordeal. Marcus lifted his gaze once more, his eyes catching the fading glow of the sun as it sank lower on the horizon. In that moment, the golden light seemed to whisper promises of a new beginning, a future where moments like these would be met with empathy and understanding, rather than fear and suspicion. The shadows lengthened, and as the day gave way to the quiet of dusk, Marcus felt an inner stirring, a gentle, resilient pulse that reaffirmed his belief in the possibility of change. The Riverbend Municipal Center, with its imposing architecture and busy halls, now stood as both a symbol of authority and a reminder of the human stories hidden behind its walls. It was a place where policies and procedures were enacted with clinical precision, yet it could also be a setting where lives were irrevocably altered by the nuances of personal bias. Marcus knew that, despite the harshness of the moment, there was a story unfolding, a story of resilience, of reclaiming identity in the face of unwarranted judgment, and of a community slowly awakening to the consequences of its own actions. In the gentle twilight, as the cool air embraced him and the sounds of the evening grew steadier, Marcus took a deep breath and resolved to carry the lessons of this day with him. The incident, though painful and unjust, had etched itself into his memory as a turning point, a moment of profound self-realization and the first step toward a broader understanding of the world's imperfections. He silently promised himself that he would not be defined by this moment of injustice. Instead, he would use it as a stepping stone toward a future where every individual could be seen for who they truly were, free from the constraints of prejudice. The lingering murmur of conversations, the rustle of leaves in the gentle wind, and the fading glow of the setting sun all seemed to conspire in weaving a narrative of quiet resilience and hope. It was a narrative that, while born out of a painful encounter, carried with it the seeds of transformation, a call for each person to reflect on their own actions and the ways in which they might contribute to a more compassionate and just community. In moments of deep introspection like Marcus's, how do you think personal resilience is forged, and what small steps can we all take to challenge our own biases? As dusk began to settle over Riverbend Municipal Center, The lingering tension in the parking lot grew heavier with each passing minute. The flashing blue and red lights had long faded into the encroaching shadows, yet the residue of injustice and confusion still clung to every surface like a stubborn mist. In the midst of this uncertain twilight, a new figure emerged, Elena Jordan, Marcus's mother, whose presence was about to upend the course of the unfolding events. Elena's arrival was quiet yet unmistakable. Dressed in a modest yet dignified outfit that spoke of resilience and determination, she moved with deliberate grace towards the cluster of police vehicles that had so recently been the epicenter of conflict. Her face, set in a determined expression, bore the marks of both exhaustion and resolve, a look that conveyed the countless battles fought silently in the name of protecting her child and upholding dignity. For Marcus, who had been sinking into a state of reflective melancholy on the weathered bench, the sight of his mother was both a balm and a sudden call to confrontation. His heart, which had been pounding with the anxiety of misunderstanding and fear, now quickened with the hope and courage that her arrival ignited. His eyes, still glistening with unshed tears, met hers briefly, a silent exchange of reassurance that spoke of unyielding love and the promise of justice. Elena's steps were measured as she approached the officers, whose earlier questions had left Marcus feeling diminished and exposed. The moment she reached the scene, a palpable shift occurred. The officers, previously absorbed in their protocols and the buzz of bystanders, now found themselves facing a figure who radiated authority not because of a badge or uniform, but because of the fierce maternal love and unwavering conviction in her eyes. "Excuse me," Elena said, her voice calm yet imbued with an undeniable firmness that cut through the murmurs of the onlookers. Her words, though soft-spoken, carried the weight of 1,000 untold stories of struggle, a narrative that had too often been written by those who saw differences as threats. One of the officers, his face a mask of practiced neutrality, regarded her with measured skepticism. "Ma'am, can you explain what's happening here?" he asked, his tone professional yet laced with an undercurrent of defensiveness. Elena's eyes swept over the scene, the silent bench where Marcus had sat alone, the group of bystanders who now watched with bated breath, and the officers whose expressions betrayed a flicker of uncertainty. "I am Elena Jordan, and that young man is my son Marcus," she stated clearly. Her voice, steady and unwavering, resonated across the quiet expanse of the lot. "He was simply waiting for me as he always does. There was no wrongdoing, only the simple act of a child seeking the comfort of his mother's presence." The officer shifted his gaze between Elena and Marcus, as if trying to reconcile the discrepancies between protocol and the truth unfolding before him. "But ma'am, a call was made reporting a suspicious individual," he insisted, his words carefully measured as he attempted to uphold the procedures he'd been trained to follow. Elena's eyes hardened slightly, her tone turning resolute. "And whose suspicion was that, officer? A stranger's biased assumption? The fact that a young man's presence in a municipal parking lot can be misconstrued as a threat simply because of his appearance." Her words, though measured, sliced through the air with an intensity that left little room for deflection. "I have dedicated my life to serving our community, and I have never seen my own child act in a way that could be construed as harmful or out of place." Around them, the gathering crowd shifted, their whispers growing louder as they sensed a confrontation that transcended a mere procedural misunderstanding. For many, Elena's stance was a mirror reflecting their own unspoken doubts about the fairness of a system that often equated difference with danger. Her words were not just for the officers, but for every bystander who had ever questioned the worth of an individual before knowing their story. Marcus, sitting a few steps behind his mother, listened intently. The fear that had gripped him earlier now mingled with a cautious optimism, as though the simple act of his mother's presence was slowly beginning to mend the wounds inflicted by the earlier encounter. He remembered the warmth of her voice from childhood stories and the protective embrace she had always offered in times of uncertainty. Now, that same strength was manifesting in her bold confrontation with authority. The officer, clearly caught between following orders and acknowledging the undeniable truth in Elena's words, hesitated. His partner, a younger officer whose eyes betrayed a hint of empathy, exchanged a glance with him. There was a silent acknowledgement that the situation was evolving into something far more complex than a routine call. A moment where human decency was challenging institutional rigidity. "We need to verify this," the skeptical officer muttered, his fingers already reaching for the radio. But before he could speak further, Elena interjected softly yet decisively. "I assure you, officer, that I am more than capable of verifying who I am, and I expect that you will treat my son with the respect and dignity that every child deserves, regardless of appearances or assumptions." Her words seemed to hang in the cool evening air, a poignant reminder that the truth of one's character could not be diminished by an unthinking adherence to stereotypes. The radio crackled faintly, and for a brief moment, the bustling activity around them paused. A collective breath held in anticipation of the unfolding verdict. In that suspended moment, the parking lot was transformed from a space of confrontation into a stage for accountability. The officer's expression softened as he slowly conceded, "All right, ma'am, we'll check your identification immediately." His tone, while still professional, now carried an undertone of reluctant respect. It was a small but significant victory, a recognition that protocol must sometimes yield to the undeniable call for justice and understanding. As Elena produced her identification and held it up for verification, the murmur among the onlookers grew. The crowd, which had earlier been a sea of uncertain faces, now radiated a quiet solidarity. People exchanged glances that spoke of shared experiences, of moments when they too had felt unseen or unfairly judged. For many, this confrontation was more than just a dispute over a misunderstanding. It was a microcosm of a larger societal battle against the insidious nature of bias. Marcus watched his mother with awe. In that instant, he realized that the courage to confront injustice did not always roar loudly. Sometimes, it was a steady, unyielding force that spoke softly yet carried the strength of 1,000 voices. His heart swelled with a renewed sense of pride and belonging, even as the residue of the earlier ordeal lingered like a shadow at the edges of his consciousness. The officer, having confirmed Elena's identity, cleared his throat and turned his attention back to Marcus. "I'm sorry for the confusion, young man," he said, his voice now tinged with regret. "You should never have been made to feel like a threat. We will review our protocols to ensure that such incidents are handled with greater care in the future." Elena offered a nod of acceptance, her gaze never leaving Marcus's face. "Thank you," she replied quietly, her voice a mixture of relief and lingering resolve. "But remember, the work doesn't end here. We must all remain vigilant, questioning our assumptions and standing up against injustice whenever we encounter it." Her words were not merely an apology or a declaration. They were a call to arms for a community that had been silently complicit for too long. As the tension began to ebb and the officers retreated to reassemble their thoughts and return to their duties, the crowd slowly dispersed, each person carrying with them a renewed awareness of the delicate balance between authority and empathy. The parking lot, bathed in the gentle glow of streetlights, seemed to exhale a collective sigh, a brief moment of calm after the storm of confrontation. For Marcus, the encounter had been transformative. It was a painful yet profound lesson in the power of a mother's love and the strength that can emerge when one stands firm in the face of systemic injustice. As he looked up at his mother, he saw not only the reflection of his own identity but also the promise of a future where every individual would be seen for who they truly are, a future where the judgments of others would be challenged and rewritten by the courage of a single voice. How can we each use our voices to challenge unfair systems, and what might be the first step toward creating a more compassionate community? In the hours that followed Elena Jordan's powerful stand in the parking lot of Riverbend Municipal Center, the atmosphere in the city shifted perceptibly. The incident, which had begun with a single call to 911 and escalated into a confrontation between prejudice and unwavering maternal love, had already taken on a life of its own. By dusk, the story had spread far beyond the confines of that small parking area, igniting conversations in living rooms, cafes, and online platforms across the community. The video, captured by a bystander's mobile phone, rapidly went viral. Social media platforms buzzed with activity as clips of Elena's calm, yet impassioned rebuttal to the officers and her insistence on Marcus Jordan's innocence were shared hundreds, then thousands, of times. Hashtags such as hashtag Justice for Marcus and hashtag See Him for Who He Is began trending, inviting people from all walks of life to reflect on the deeper issues at play. It wasn't long before local news outlets picked up the story, and soon, every major channel in Riverbend was reporting on the incident that had so vividly encapsulated a pervasive societal challenge. At the Riverbend Municipal Center itself, the aftershocks of the confrontation were palpable. Within the building's corridors, whispers of disquiet mixed with quiet debates over what had transpired. Many employees, some of whom had witnessed the event firsthand, found themselves grappling with conflicting emotions. There was an unspoken acknowledgement that something had gone terribly awry in their midst, a moment where an innocent act of waiting had been twisted into an ordeal defined by bias. Meanwhile, at City Hall, Mayor Thomas Carmichael, a figure known for his measured demeanor and long-standing commitment to civic service, prepared to address the public. The mayor had spent the better part of the night in earnest discussions with his staff, piecing together every detail of the event and consulting with community leaders, civil rights advocates, and members of the police department. The urgency in his tone during these conversations reflected not only the seriousness of the incident but also his recognition that this was an inflection point for the community. The following morning, the city's central rotunda was packed with citizens, activists, and local media, all gathered to hear Mayor Carmichael speak. At the podium, beneath the emblem of Riverbend, he spoke with a somber yet resolute voice that resonated across the hushed hall. "What we witnessed yesterday," he began, pausing to let the weight of his words settle over the audience, "was not merely an isolated event, but a reflection of a systemic issue that has long plagued our society. An innocent young man, simply waiting for his mother, was treated as a threat because of preconceived notions and unfounded fears." He recounted the events as they unfolded in the parking lot, how a call for safety had morphed into a confrontation that threatened to undermine the very values of justice and equality upon which the community was built. His words acknowledged the pain felt by Marcus Jordan and many others who had, at one time or another, experienced the sting of prejudice. "We cannot allow bias to dictate the treatment of any member of our community," Mayor Carmichael declared. "Today, we stand together, not just to condemn an act, but to commit ourselves to the work of transforming our institutions so that every individual is seen and valued for who they truly are." The mayor's speech, broadcast live and shared widely on social media, became a catalyst for a broader dialogue. Community forums sprang up, and town hall meetings were scheduled in neighborhoods across Riverbend. These gatherings provided spaces for residents to share their own experiences, to express their frustrations and hopes, and to collectively brainstorm ways to bridge the divide between authority and empathy. The conversation, once relegated to hushed tones in private, was now vibrant and public, an earnest attempt to reckon with a difficult past and chart a course toward a more inclusive future. Back at Riverbend Municipal Center, the ripple effects of the incident also reached the front lines of public service. The police department, traditionally steeped in protocols and routine procedures, was forced to confront the implications of their actions during the incident. Senior officers convened a series of internal reviews and discussions about bias, cultural sensitivity, and the imperative of community trust. Workshops and training sessions were scheduled, not as a temporary measure, but as an ongoing commitment to reform, a pledge that echoed the passionate call for change voiced by Elena Jordan just hours earlier. For Marcus Jordan, the aftermath was a tumultuous blend of relief, lingering pain, and cautious optimism. In the quiet sanctuary of his room, Marcus replayed the day's events in his mind. The video that had once captured his vulnerability was now a symbol of his resilience. Comments from strangers who had reached out, messages of support and solidarity, provided a balm for the wounds inflicted by the ordeal. Yet, there was also a deep-seated understanding that the journey toward healing and true justice would be long and winding. His experience had become a touchstone, a vivid reminder of the work that lay ahead in dismantling the prejudices that had so unjustly marred an ordinary day. Across Riverbend, conversations took on a more reflective tone. In cafes, over coffee and casual chats, people discussed the dual-edged nature of safety and suspicion. At community centers, local leaders organized workshops on bias and inclusion, inviting speakers who had navigated the challenging terrain of systemic discrimination. In schools, educators incorporated discussions about empathy, identity, and social justice into their curricula, hoping to nurture a generation that would one day look back on these events as the turning point in their community's evolution. Even as the city rallied toward change, not everyone was ready to embrace the emerging narrative. A small faction of residents, clinging to long-held beliefs and resistant to the winds of change, voiced their concerns. They argued that the incident was an aberration, a misunderstanding blown out of proportion by emotional rhetoric and media hype. However, for many in Riverbend, the weight of the evidence was undeniable. The incident had laid bare the uncomfortable truths about fear, judgment, and the dire consequences of acting on bias without reflection. As the days turned into weeks, the ripple effects of that fateful afternoon continued to shape the dialogue in Riverbend. Mayor Carmichael's address had set in motion a series of reforms that promised to redefine the relationship between the city's institutions and its citizens. Policies were revised, and a new task force on community relations was established, charged with the mission of ensuring that every interaction between public servants and residents was guided by principles of fairness, respect, and genuine care. In a quiet neighborhood not far from the municipal center, Marcus Jordan found solace in a support group formed by other young people who had experienced similar encounters. Here, amidst shared stories and empathetic nods, Marcus began to see that his experience was part of a larger tapestry, a narrative that, while painful, was also ripe with the potential for transformation. The group met regularly in a modest community center, where discussions flowed freely, and the air was filled with both laughter and tears. It was a space where vulnerability was met with compassion, and where each individual was encouraged to become an agent of change. Through these gatherings, Marcus discovered the power of community solidarity. He learned that while one moment of injustice could leave an indelible mark, it also had the power to spark collective action. His voice, once muted by fear and isolation, began to emerge with quiet strength. With the support of his peers, he started writing journals filled with reflections on the day that had altered his life and essays that called for empathy and understanding in the face of societal bias. His words, raw and unfiltered, resonated with many who read them, igniting discussions on local blogs and community boards. In classrooms across Riverbend, teachers used Marcus's story as a starting point for broader conversations about history, identity, and the importance of challenging stereotypes. Students engaged in debates, creative projects, and community service initiatives aimed at promoting inclusivity. For some, Marcus's experience was a painful reminder of past injustices. For others, it became a rallying cry for a future where every individual's worth was recognized, regardless of appearance or background. Throughout this period of intense introspection and mobilization, Elena Jordan remained a steadfast figure, a symbol of love and unyielding resistance against injustice. She continued to speak at public events and community meetings, always returning to the core message of her impassioned confrontation: that the safety of a community depended not on the blind adherence to outdated protocols, but on the courage to see and value every human being for who they truly are. Her journey, marked by moments of both triumph and heartbreak, inspired countless others to stand up and speak out, transforming her personal struggle into a collective movement. As the sun set on another day in Riverbend, the echoes of that afternoon still reverberated in the quiet corners of the city. The once divisive incident had sown the seeds of a renewed commitment to justice, a promise that, despite the challenges ahead, the community was ready to rebuild, reimagine, and restore the dignity of every individual who called Riverbend home. What steps do you think are most important for a community to take after witnessing an injustice, and how can individual voices contribute to systemic change? In the wake of the intense public discussions and sweeping changes that followed the Riverbend incident, life began to take on a different hue for those involved. For Marcus Jordan, each new day brought subtle shifts in the way he saw himself and his place in a community that was slowly learning to embrace the lessons of that fateful afternoon. The raw pain of being misjudged had not vanished overnight, but in its stead emerged a resolute commitment to healing and transformation, a new dawn that promised growth beyond the scars of yesterday. Marcus's journey toward healing started in the quiet sanctuary of his own thoughts. At first, the memories of flashing lights and harsh voices were inescapable, haunting echoes that seemed to replay in moments of solitude. But as the days passed, he began to channel that pain into something constructive. The support group he had joined provided a safe space where his experiences were met with empathy rather than judgment. Sharing his story with others who had faced similar trials offered him the reassurance that he was not alone. His voice, once silenced by fear, was now an instrument of collective strength. In the soft morning light that filtered through the window of his modest bedroom, Marcus would sit at his desk with a notebook open before him. Here, he poured out his thoughts and reflections, pages filled with raw emotion and the tentative sketches of hope. His writing evolved from anguished outbursts into carefully crafted essays, each word a step toward reclaiming the dignity that had been so brutally questioned. With every sentence, he reclaimed a fragment of his identity, transforming pain into poetry, fear into fortitude. Outside of his personal introspection, Marcus noticed a gentle transformation rippling through his community. Local schools began incorporating lessons on empathy, social justice, and the importance of confronting bias in their curricula. Teachers shared stories of the incident with their students, inviting open dialogue about identity and the power of understanding one another. In classrooms, the subject of prejudice was no longer shrouded in silence. Instead, it was dissected, debated, and ultimately understood as part of a broader tapestry of shared human experiences. Meanwhile, community centers organized art and writing workshops where young people, inspired by Marcus's courage, expressed their own journeys through creative outlets. Paintings and poems blossomed on bulletin boards and gallery walls, each piece a testament to a generation unwilling to let historical injustices define their future. In these vibrant spaces, art became both a mirror and a roadmap, a way to look inward and chart a course toward a more compassionate society. Elena Jordan, ever the unwavering pillar of strength, continued her advocacy beyond the confines of the parking lot confrontation. In public forums and quiet meetings alike, she spoke not just of the incident, but of the broader implications of systemic bias. With each address, her words carried the weight of personal loss and the luminous promise of change. She became a beacon for those who felt marginalized, a reminder that the call for justice was as much about nurturing the present as it was about reforming the past. Her steadfast presence bolstered community efforts, ensuring that the momentum sparked by that single day would not dissipate into the routine hum of everyday life. At the heart of these changes was a newfound willingness among local officials to listen and learn. The police department, having embarked on a journey of introspection through mandated anti-bias training and open community dialogues, began to shift its approach. Officers were encouraged to see beyond the confines of protocols, recognizing that each interaction was an opportunity to build trust rather than reinforce fear. While progress was gradual and the echoes of old habits sometimes persisted, the direction was clear, a move toward a more nuanced understanding of public safety that balanced vigilance with humanity. For Marcus, these community efforts were both validating and inspiring. In one memorable afternoon, he attended a town hall meeting where citizens gathered to share their experiences and hopes for the future. As he listened to neighbors recount their own stories of misunderstanding and resilience, he realized that his painful experience was a spark that had ignited a broader conversation, a conversation that was slowly reshaping the very foundations of his community. In that moment, Marcus recognized that healing was not merely a personal journey, but a collective one, woven from the threads of shared pain and mutual support. In the weeks that followed, Marcus's confidence began to blossom. The once timid young man who had been overwhelmed by suspicion was now emerging as a thoughtful, articulate advocate for change. His essays, once hidden away in the quiet corners of his room, found their way onto community blogs and local newsletters. They resonated deeply with readers, many of whom saw their own struggles reflected in his words. Through his writing, Marcus not only processed his own emotions but also became a conduit for broader societal reflection, a reminder that transformation begins with honest self-expression. One crisp autumn evening, as Marcus walked home under a sky lit by the gentle glow of streetlights, he paused at the edge of a small park. The vibrant colors of the season, fiery reds, warm oranges, and deep golds, seemed to mirror the complexity of his emotions. In that serene moment, he realized that while the wounds of injustice might never completely vanish, they could give way to resilience, understanding, and a commitment to build something better. The scars of the past were not symbols of weakness, but marks of survival, a testament to the fact that every challenge carries within it the seeds of transformation. As Marcus continued on his path, he discovered that healing was not linear but a mosaic of progress, setbacks, and moments of profound clarity. There were days when the memories threatened to overwhelm him, when the weight of injustice felt unbearable. Yet, in those moments, he drew strength from the community that had rallied around him, from the shared experiences that validated his pain, and from the promise that, together, they could forge a future marked by understanding rather than division. In the quiet corners of Riverbend, where once suspicion reigned, a new narrative was taking shape, a narrative defined by empathy, active listening, and the unyielding belief that every person deserved to be seen and respected for who they truly were. Marcus's journey was a microcosm of this larger shift, a journey from isolation to inclusion, from pain to empowerment. His story was far from over, but with each step forward, he grew more determined to transform his experiences into a force for positive change. What does healing mean to you? And how can sharing your story inspire transformation in your community? As autumn faded into winter, Riverbend began to settle into a reflective calm, a quiet after the storm of change. The echoes of that fateful day at the municipal center had sparked more than just immediate reforms. They had ignited a cultural shift that would shape the community for years to come. The once fractured narrative of fear and misunderstanding was gradually being rewritten into one of resilience, empathy, and collective responsibility. For Marcus Jordan, the journey that had once felt defined by pain and isolation now blossomed into a hopeful pursuit of a better future. In the months following the incident, his writings evolved into a platform for advocacy. His essays and reflections, shared widely on local blogs, school newspapers, and community newsletters, had become a source of inspiration not only for those who had experienced injustice firsthand, but also for individuals seeking to understand the power of empathy and transformation. Marcus's voice, once trembling with uncertainty, now resonated with a quiet authority, a call for the community to look within and to embrace change. Elena Jordan continued her tireless work as an advocate for justice, using every opportunity to speak out against bias and to promote inclusive policies. Her weekly appearances at town halls, community centers, and local radio stations became a rallying cry for residents eager to reshape the cultural landscape of Riverbend. With each public address, she reminded people that true change begins when we challenge our own assumptions and work together to build a society where every individual is valued. Meanwhile, the impact of the incident was visible in unexpected ways. At local schools, students participated in art and writing projects that explored themes of identity, resilience, and unity. Teachers incorporated discussions on empathy and diversity into their lesson plans, fostering an environment where young people could question stereotypes and learn the value of seeing beyond appearances. In one particularly moving project, students created a community mural, a vibrant tapestry of colors and images that celebrated the diversity of Riverbend, symbolizing both the scars of past injustices and the promise of a renewed future. At the Riverbend Municipal Center, the administration's commitment to change was further institutionalized. A task force on community relations was established, ensuring that the voices of residents, especially those who had been marginalized, were heard in decision-making processes. The police department, too, was undergoing a transformation. Regular anti-bias training sessions and community engagement initiatives began to bridge the gap between law enforcement and the public, slowly rebuilding trust that had been eroded by past actions. While progress was not instantaneous, the shared commitment to reform laid the groundwork for a safer and more just community. As winter's chill gradually gave way to the promise of spring, the city celebrated a milestone that many had once thought impossible. A public forum where every voice, regardless of background, was encouraged to share its story. Under a clear blue sky, community members gathered in a spacious park at the heart of Riverbend. The event, aptly named Voices of Tomorrow, was a testament to the resilience of a community that had learned to transform adversity into opportunity. At the forum, Marcus took the stage once more. His eyes, reflecting both the wisdom gained from hardship and the hope for a brighter future, swept across a crowd that included friends, neighbors, and even some of the very officers who had once enforced an unjust system. His speech was a heartfelt plea for unity, a reminder that every person's story mattered and that lasting change could only come when society embraced its diversity with open hearts. He spoke of the power of shared experiences to heal wounds and bridge divides, urging his listeners to challenge the status quo and to champion the rights of all citizens. As the event drew to a close, the atmosphere was charged with a sense of renewal. People left with hearts lighter and minds clearer, united by the understanding that while the scars of injustice might never fully vanish, they could serve as reminders of the strength inherent in the human spirit. The community had come together not just to acknowledge the past, but to actively shape a future where empathy, justice, and respect were the cornerstones of everyday life. In the quiet moments after the forum, as twilight draped the city in soft hues of lavender and gold, Riverbend stood as a living testament to the transformative power of resilience. The journey was far from over. Each day presented new challenges and opportunities to reaffirm the commitment to change. But in that shared space of collective hope, every person understood that a new beginning was not just possible. It was already underway. What do you believe is the most essential quality for a community to embrace when striving to heal from past injustices? And how can we each contribute to building that future? As our journey comes to an end, let this story remind us that love and understanding are our most powerful tools in the face of injustice. Every act of kindness, every moment of courage to challenge the status quo, contributes to a world where every person is cherished for who they are. Let the light of compassion guide you, and may your heart always stand firm in the pursuit of fairness and dignity for all. Thank you for joining us on this journey of truth and transformation. If you believe in building a more compassionate future together, please hit the subscribe button and join our community.